Hi all, I'd like to do a series on the Slav Defense. So this is a system against d4. So if the opponent plays d4 and you want to have a good opening against it, I think I can safely recommend the Slav Variation. So what is the Slav? Let's have a quick look. So black plays d5, so a classical kind of move, occupying the centre with a pawn. So none of this hyper-modern stuff with knight f6. By playing d5 you're immediately blocking white's pawn. And after c4, white's immediately exerting pressure on d5. Now classically, the Queen's Gambit declined, you would just play e6. Let's have a quick look. e6, and you'll see that one immediate problem when you play this in this classical way is you're hemming in your Queen's bishop. So this is one of the problems that the Slav addresses. If instead you want to support your pawn on d5 still, so you don't want to play the Queen's Gambit accepted, you have a viable option with c6. So with c6 you're keeping that Queen's bishop to be able to come out either maybe to f5 or to g4 later. Now, interestingly, if white plays knight c3 and you play knight f6 and white plays e3, there's a very important branch of the Slav called the semi-Slav, and this advantage of the Queen's bishop, paradoxically you block it in with e6. So it seems a bit silly that you're giving yourself this locked in bishop in the semi-Slav, but there is an intention still in variations later to get this bishop out with tempo. And in order to explore the semi-Slav and the main Slav, what I want to do is look at key games from the recent Dresden tournament, which I found a really amazing tournament. The top 4 players elected from each country, and the Slav did very well in that. So its popularity from the World Championship match has obviously persisted, and there's a lot of theory to cover. So I'm just going to look at the wins with black, basically, an emphasis on winning with black with this Slav system. And the first game I want to look at is Van Wheelie. So in round 9, he was on the black side, and he reached this position. His opponent played knight f3. So we class this in particular as the semi-Slav because black has hemmed in the Queen's bishop. So how did his opponent play? His opponent played after knight bd7, bishop d3, we see one of the points that you can resolve the Queen's bishop issue by taking on c4, because now the Slav move c6 is supporting b5, so you're gaining a tempo on white's bishop. And now Van Wheelie played a6, so again seemingly blocking in his bishop, but the bishop's going to come out to b7 and he's going to liberate it with c5 later. So we'll get the same kind of strategy that we saw employed successfully by Anand in the recent World Championship match against Kramnik. So after e4 c5, and we're following the same line as the Kramnik Anand games. So c takes d4, knight takes b5, so white's temporarily sacking the knight because he's getting black's knight on f6. And after g takes f6, we see that black potentially is going to use the semi-open g file later. White castles, and now we saw queen b6 protecting that b pawn. White exerts more pressure on the b pawn and also the centre. So here, the actual mainline move, more than what Anand played in his preparation against Kramnik. So Anand played bishop b7. The mainline move is bishop a6. And when I mentioned this before briefly, I wasn't 100% sure about white's plan with a4 potentially and ab, but we're going to see in this game why a4 is not so dangerous. And in doing so, we're also going to explore other resources for black to try and achieve a more comfortable understanding of what resources are available to the black player. I think this game example illustrates that black can use more the central pawns later, and in this game we'll see that he sacrifices the exchange against his 26-40 opponent. So his opponent is actually high rated. Van Wheelie's 26-18, so they're both GMs at that level. So a4. So how is this a critical test of black's position? You know, what does black do? Does black really want to play B8 or B4? No, Van Weely just does bishop G7. So one of the immediate points is if bishop takes B5, then that obviously white's losing a piece. Let's have a quick look. Because bishop takes B5 and there's a horrible pin. But, you know, so queen takes, and there's a horrible pin. But A takes B wins a pawn for white, yes? Well, yes, but bishop B7. So here, black, you know, is accepting a pawn loss, but these pawns are not that useful. This bishop is very nice on the diagonal and can coordinate potentially with a rook. And white's still, you know, faced, you know, black's got this lovely central pawns everywhere. So how did this game continue? Well, in the game, actually, I mean, this is sufficient compensation for black. Let's have a look at a Rybka variation where it only gives white a tiny advantage. So say rook d1, knight e5, and black's got these lovely, you know, central pawns which grab a lot of central control, and potentially following up with later f5. In the game, white played actually a5. So if you're playing the Slav with black, you've got various options nowadays. You can play bishop b7 like Anand, or you can play bishop a6, and not fear about white winning the b5 pawn. You've got enough central pawn compensation and a great bishop. So a5 in this game was played. Now queen d6. So white's preserving, you know, the two pawns, potentially maybe going to work on the dark squares. White played now queen e4, hitting the rook, stopping castling because of queen h7 mate. So rook d8, and now queen g4. So another seemingly annoying move. If black castles, then bishop h6 is going to be winning. Let's quickly check that. Bishop h6 is winning. Rybka reckons mate in 3, giving the absurd queen g3. So black can't castle here, but no fear. Black's asset is the central pawns. So this is something to be aware of in this variation. So king f8 is fine, and we'll see the rest of the game now. Bishop f4, knight e5, and black centralizes another pawn. Look at this pawn mass emerging. f5, and it seems, you know, white's trying to get behind black's position here with rook fc1, an infiltration which would be dangerous. But basically, Van Weely is prepared to even sacrifice material if he can utilize these central pawns later. So rook c6 and then queen d5, offering the exchange of queens, and it seems losing this bishop is really dangerous because, you know, white's got this dangerous passed a pawn. So that's the whole point of white's play. But is it good enough? Because Van Weely strikes now with his central pawn mass. He starts moving that forward with e4. So rook a8, taking on h8, now a6. And here, so white's obviously wanting more time to try and queen. Van Weely accepts this because he's preparing to sacrifice the exchange to stop the pawn queening. So a very exciting game here. Now look at these pawns coming down like space invaders. d2, so white desperately defends against that. Now d3. So even though white's able to pick up the d2 pawn, it's still too late, because after e5 takes an e4, now black's got this amazing bishop and the ability to march the king up to herd the pawns more. So we'll see what happens now. The king marches up, and white's passively left to defend, you know, f2 and b2, so he can't centralize his king anymore, and his rook's trapped. This is hopeless. The rest of the game was like this. So b2, rook b8, bishop c3, and white had had enough. So in this position, if king d1, then bishop b4, and the pawn is queening. So that's a brilliant game example from the Olympiad, which is almost a side variation. You know, if people were wondering, you know, why was bishop a6 an important move in this semi-Slav? So this semi-Slav, black is temporarily locking in the bishop. So you're playing now d takes c4. So you're not bothering to develop your f8 bishop. You're just trying to gain the tempo now and immediately deal with your queen's bishop problem. Let's go back to one of the main backgrounds of the Slav. So we said that one of the main issues compared to the Queen's Gambit declined with the Slav is you're solving the Queen's bishop issue, which is not strictly true because later, you know, you're letting it be blocked in, but you have the intention then of d takes c4 followed by b5. And let's also note, you know, that if white doesn't want black to play d takes c4 and plays, for example, c takes d, then e takes and you liberate the bishop again, so that's fine.